or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Corrine, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the June 30th, 2026 issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. As always, thank you for joining us today. The highlights under business and finance are: Comcast plans to separate its media and connectivity businesses, dismantling an earlier bet on combined entertainment and distribution as it navigates intensifying competitive pressure. The Dow gained 0.6% to hit its 18th record of the year and close above 52,000 for the first time, and the Nasdaq and S&P 500 both broke 5-session losing streaks to rise 2.1% and 1.2% respectively. Michael Sayers' strategy plans to buy back stock and sell Bitcoin among many moves aimed at stemming the loss of confidence in the crypto hoarding company. Martin Marietta Materials has struck a deal to combine with limestone supplier Lavaste North America in a transaction valued at $13.5 billion, including debt. Verizon and Britain's BT Group are merging international operations in a deal aimed at allowing both telecoms to focus more on their domestic businesses. Building products maker Carlisle Costs made more than one unsolicited offer to acquire roofing maker Owens Corning in what would be a well over $10 billion deal, according to people familiar with the matter. Rocket Lab agreed to buy Iridium, a deal that would give it control over a satellite fleet and access to wireless resources it could use to compete with SpaceX. Samsung Electronics and SK Hynix plan to invest more than $500 million in a new chip-making hub in southwestern South Korea. Now for the key articles under the worldwide section. The Supreme Court rejected Trump's bid to fire Fed Governor Lisa Cook with little legal scrutiny, but in a second decision, it gave him free rein to fire officials at other independent agencies for any reason. The High Court declined to take up the president's appeal of a jury verdict finding that he sexually abused and defamed writer E.G. Carroll, leaving intact a $5 million judgment. The court also upheld state laws that count mailed ballots if they are postmarked by Election Day but arrive a few days afterward. A federal judge permanently blocked the Trump administration from withholding funds from a $16 billion rail tunnel project under the Hudson River. A hot tax break, known as trust stacking, and beloved by company founders and angel investors, is expanding so rapidly that it is drawing the ire of the Trump administration. The judge overseeing Alex Murdaugh's retrial on double homicide charges set April 5th as the date for the new proceedings. Trump said he would nominate acting head Keith Sonderling as Labor Secretary. Exiled Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado accused the ruling regime of blocking her from flying home from Panama to help with earthquake relief. A U.S. judge sentenced China critic and tycoon Gu Wengui to 30 years in prison for racketeering and fraud and ordered forfeiture of $889 million. A pilot landed a JetBlue flight at New York's JFK airport, reported hitting a drone, the FAA said. The U.S.-Iran deal to free up shipping in the Strait of Hormuz promises a cash injection for the Tehran regime, but for ordinary Iranians, economic relief is likely to take much longer. China hit dozens more Japanese companies and several research institutes with trade restrictions. The picture on today's front page shows two young soldiers atop a vehicle, and that caption reads, "On guard." U.S. soldiers patrolled Carabayeda, Venezuela, on Monday as part of an extraordinary effort to help the nation's new U.S.-aligned government respond to twin earthquakes. That headline, U.S. troops arrive to aid Venezuela. The article, Venezuelans Blast Quake Response, by Keja Villas and Vera Bergengruen, Caracas, Venezuela. With time running out, firefighters and paramedics from Virginia, equipped with concrete cutting saws, acoustic devices, and precision locating equipment, gingerly pulled out a father and son trapped for 4 days. Laid out on makeshift stretchers, they were carried to an ambulance. Residents who have seen little but death since twin quakes hit last Wednesday broke out in applause and shouted, "Gracias, gracias." By contrast, crowds jeered at the acting Venezuelan president, Delcy Rodriguez, chanting, "Get out, get out," when she went to visit one hard-hit neighborhood. Venezuelans searching for loved ones mocked Venezuelan National Guard troops, yelling they were incompetent and only good for crushing protest. Some people have lambasted service members for taking selfies outside flattened buildings. In one widely shared video, a man drives a soldier and an official from his ransacked home. The Trump administration is throwing resources into Venezuela's earthquake response, hoping the relief operation will showcase the benefits of its unlikely alliance with Rodriguez's interim government. But amid the ruins, the effort is colliding with ordinary Venezuelans who revile their government. "People don't realize she's under the rubble too," said Martin Rodil, a Venezuelan activist who has worked with U.S. law enforcement to investigate Venezuelan officials, speaking of the interim president. The disaster has become the first major test of Washington's effort to make Rodriguez's rule palatable to Venezuelans. But public anger is boiling over as the death count on Monday rose to 1,719, with tens of thousands still missing. 3 Americans are confirmed dead, with 12 more missing, U.S. officials said. In all, some 16,000 people have been left homeless. While the Trump administration has thrown its support behind Rodriguez since a U.S. military raid captured her predecessor, Nicolas Maduro, the government she leads is known for vast corruption and mismanagement that doomed the economy and led more than 8 million people to flee abroad. Diego Aria, a former high-ranking Venezuelan diplomat who lives in Miami, said he worried that the U.S. may end up hurting its own interest by siding too closely with Rodriguez. I think what they're doing is causing resentment among the people there, he said. Today it's against the Delcy government. Tomorrow it'll be against the United States. Other articles from the front page follow. Justices block Trump firing of Fed official. High Court bolsters president's sway over agencies, even as it insulates central bank. By James Rameser and Nick Timiraeus, Washington. The Supreme Court rejected President Trump's bid to fire Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook with little legal scrutiny, but gave him free rein to fire officials at other independent agencies for any reason. The decision in the Cook case, by a 5-4 vote, reaffirms the central bank's long-standing insulation from presidential control. That ruling dealt a stinging blow to Trump's mission to remake the Fed, which he has repeatedly criticized for not lowering interest rates more aggressively. But in a second 6-3 decision, the justices granted a major expansion of presidential power over the vast regulatory apparatus that sits over the U.S. economy. That case, involving the Federal Trade Commission, will give Trump and future presidents broad latitude to oust leaders of policy-making agencies that Congress sought to shelter from political pressure. Those agencies set rules on everything from consumer protection and collective bargaining to the safety of nuclear reactors. Comcast to split in two, unwind cable from media, by Jessica Tunkel and Gareth Vipers. Comcast plans to separate its media and connectivity businesses, dismantling an earlier bet on combined entertainment and distribution as it navigates intensifying competitive pressure. The cable and entertainment company, home to Saturday Night Live, Law and Order, and Bravo, aims to complete a tax-free spin-off of NBC Universal and Sky, establishing a pure play media company. The standalone NBC Universal will be led by Mike Cavanaugh, who is currently Comcast co-chief executive, while former chief financial officer Michael Angelakis will return to run Comcast. Shares in the company, which were down about 30% over the past year, rose 4.5% on Monday. The deal will transform a titan of the connectivity and entertainment industries that has used its scale as a flywheel for franchises like Minions, Fast and Furious, and Wicked, and to help fund new business ventures. The health and size of Comcast's core connectivity business allowed it to invest in major sports rights deals and build its streaming business, Peacock. Now, company leaders believe the media and connectivity businesses should stand alone as publicly traded companies, providing more opportunity to pursue deals and better compete. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Recordings reveal secrets of a $50 million con. Paul Reagan, who pleaded guilty to fraud, taped himself ripping off clients to teach others how to do it too. By Jason Zweig. Paul Reagan claimed to have discovered the investment holy grail of high return at low risk, offering investors a chance to earn 10%, even 15% or more annually for up to 10 years guaranteed. That might seem too good to be true, and it was. But Reagan pulled from a bag of tricks to rip off his clients, and he recorded many of his phone calls to teach others how to rip people off too. Those recordings offer rare access into the inner workings of a fraud and the psychological tactics of a master of deception. They show how Reagan made a multi-pronged assault on clients' emotions by playing on their vulnerabilities, their need for income, and their yearning to believe. A bear of a man, at least 6'2" and approaching 300 pounds, Reagan could gently convey empathy. He charmed investors with his sense of humor. He also commanded an army of dozens of commission-hungry salespeople, including agents with little investing knowledge. This very long article continues and shows ways in which he conned vulnerable people. Psychological experiments have shown that people are more likely to believe someone who is likable, seems authoritative, and creates a feeling of belonging to a special community. Reagan and Jonathan Guzman, his sales chief, recruited insurance agents who were hundreds of thousands of dollars in debt and eager to get out of the hole, said people familiar with the matter. Guzman denies playing that role. Reagan's team dangled commissions that could hit 15%. By late 2024, Reagan had misappropriated at least $50 million of the $63 million he raised, the SEC alleged when it filed civil fraud charges against him in September 2025. Reagan will be sentenced in August, although his plea deal agreement requires him to make full restitution. It isn't clear how much money, if any, investors will get back. Remote work stalls grads' job prospects by Owen Tucker Smith. After 2 years and 150 job applications, Kylie Clapp settled for something she hadn't initially sought out, a company with no office. The 24-year-old colleagues are scattered across living rooms around the country, dealing in Slack messages and emails, but never chatting by the water cooler because there isn't one. Working from her home in New Jersey, she goes days without hearing a colleague's voice or seeing one's face. When she does, the interaction is to the point. You give me a task, she says, I give you an output. In the back of Clapp's mind is the fear of getting left behind. The job market is so bad right now, she said, I need to network. And if that isn't enough, remote work has ruined my social life, she said. 6 years ago, the pandemic sent Clapp and her peers home from their high school months before their graduations. Now, much of Generation Z remains alien to the office. And while executives like Jamie Dimon and Andy Jassy campaign to get workers back to their desks, remote work remains a staple of the workplace, leaving recent grads zooming into conference calls. Those workers sometimes struggle to connect with mentors or shadow senior employees. Training junior workers remotely is very expensive, said startup founder Jason Crawford. It becomes this silent tax on senior time. Crawford's top employees would be more productive at home, he said, but junior ones aren't. Recent grads are already fretting that artificial intelligence is shrinking the junior job market. Compounding those worries is fresh economic research arguing that frustration among employers like Crawford over how working from home policies have played out might have caused them to cut back on hiring young workers altogether. A company's return on investment hinges on the rate at which that young employee learns. Since remote work slows that process, the researchers argued companies see young talent as less attractive value propositions, preferring to invest in older workers. As a result, remote work doesn't just dampen young employees' day-to-day experience, it also makes it harder for them to find a job in the future. Now for other articles within the paper. IRS warns against trust stacking tax break by Ashley Eberling, Richard Rubin, and Peter Santilli. A hot tax break beloved by company founders and angel investors is expanding so rapidly that it is drawing the ire of the Trump administration. At issue is what is known as trust stacking, which multiplies the benefits of a tax break for investors in small companies by 2, 3, 4, or even more times. The Qualified Small Business Stock Tax Break, or QSBS, allows founders to exclude up to $15 million in capital gains from their taxable income. But people are trying to exclude $60 billion and beyond by transferring shares to trust in their relatives' names. Treasury Department officials in this administration typically take a pro-taxpayer posture, but they have signaled a coming crackdown. Let me just warn you, said Kenneth Keyes, the Treasury's top tax policy official, in a speech last month. We don't like stacking, okay? QSBS lets investors and founders avoid what would otherwise be as much as a 23.8% tax on the sale of shares. Created in 1993 and expanded since then, it enjoys bipartisan support because it is linked to the small businesses, entrepreneurship, and early-stage investment that lawmakers want to promote. These days, QSBS is frequently used in technology startups, where the goal is to get big. Last year's tax law sweetened the QSBS break further, raising the cap to $15 million from $10 million for stock acquired since July 4th, 2025, and increasing the maximum size of companies that count as small businesses. Stock must be held for 5 years for the full exclusion. Regime's gain leaves gap in Iran economy. Ordinary citizens won't share in Truce's bounty as new cash flows in. By Georgi Kanchev and Henna Musavi. Dubai. The U.S.-Iran deal to free up shipping in the Strait of Hormuz promises a quick cash injection for the Tehran regime. For ordinary Iranians, economic relief is likely to take much longer. A Trump administration waiver last week to let Iran sell its oil and receive dollar payments gives the government a path to earning billions of dollars in badly needed foreign currency following the war and years of crushing sanctions. Iran's oil exports have begun to rise despite tit-for-tat strikes in recent days, says Tanker Trackers. Some analysts estimate Iran could gain as much as $10 billion in the next 2 months from the oil sales alone. Another positive sign for Iran is that U.S. and other officials have said the two sides have agreed to end the latest round of fighting and resume talks. But taming galloping inflation, reviving consumer demand, and creating jobs will take time. It also will depend on whether confidence in the deal will last and on ensuring the money flowing back to Iran isn't diverted to military or regional militia allies. Crucially, Iran also faces reconstruction costs estimated in the hundreds of billions of dollars, far more than the initial oil boost is likely to cover. That gap could become the deal's first domestic test for the regime. Iran's balance sheet might improve within weeks, but its battered economy likely will take months or longer to feel the effect. In the short term, this is a windfall, but it isn't enough to kickstart the broader economy, said Gregory Brew, a senior analyst focusing on Iran at Eurasia Group, which estimates that the oil sales waiver could be worth $8 billion to $10 billion to Iran over 60 days. Tremendous damage has been done to industries and to infrastructure in major cities, and the government needs to create an impression that peace will last, that the bombing won't come back. Skepticism has roots in the aftermath of the 2015 nuclear accord negotiated under President Barack Obama. The sanctions relief provided under that deal helped Iran raise oil exports and reconnect parts of its economy to global trade. But the gains were brief and uneven. President Trump then withdrew the U.S. from the pact in his first term and reimposed sanctions. Some Iranians now fear a repeat, with any relief too short-lived to improve daily life. Worse, some believe that new oil revenue will first shore up the regime and its allies, leaving households with little to show for it. Ukraine. Zelensky condemns deadly attacks. Russian missiles and drones killed at least 11 civilians and injured 40 others in Ukraine on Monday in what President Volodymyr Zelensky described as horrific attacks. A Russian missile targeting infrastructure struck the central city of Dnipro, killing 5 people and wounding 29, Zelensky said on social media. Russian drones also hit a passenger minibus in the southern city of Zaporizhia, killing 3 and wounding 6, including a child, he said. Russian drones also killed a 69-year-old woman and a 77-year-old man in the northeastern Sumy region, National Police said. A daytime Russian strike killed one person and wounded 5 others in the northeastern city, said Kharkiv mayor. Other deadly attacks occurred in at least 6 other regions of Ukraine, authorities said. Zelensky renewed his plea for Europe to step up its development of air defenses to block Russia's ballistic missiles. And that was from the Associated Press. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the editorial page, 2 big Supreme Court rulings with Alito and conservatives in dissent. Liberal wins on mail votes and geo-fencing. So much for the mega Supreme Court. That's the Democratic cliche for attacking the justices, yet they released 4 major rulings Monday, and the liberals won in 3. That includes a pair of cases, both with Justice Samuel Alito in fierce dissent, upholding late mail ballots and erecting a legal bar for police geofence investigations. Sluggish election results are terrible for public confidence, but purely for voter convenience, many states give residents until Election Day to mail their ballots, and then officials spend a week or more afterward counting tardy arrivals. The question for justices: does this violate federal laws passed starting in 1845 that set a uniform election day? No, says a 5-4 majority of Justice Amy Coney Barrett, Chief Justice John Roberts, and the liberal trio. Election day is when the electorate must make its choice, Justice Barrett writes in Watson versus Republican National Committee. The electorate's choice is made when voting is complete, not when ballots are received. The challenges, she adds, have no statutory basis for making ballot receipt the magic moment. She says states accepted tardy mail ballots amid World War I, while 7 authorized the practice during the 1940s. Dissenting for 4 conservatives, Justice Alito argues those were short-lived outlier rules that shed little light on the original meaning of election. He focuses on voting during the Civil War and says states then didn't accept late ballots. When Congress enacted the 3 election day statutes, having the election on a particular date meant that ballots would be collected by that date. Also, what about late ballots without postmarks? If a handwritten date says election day, is that fine? How about votes delivered to officials a week later by partisan ballot harvesters? The majority's decision opens Pandora's box, Justice Alito says. The good news is Congress can override it by revising the election day laws. This would be a better push for Republicans than the doomed Save America Act. The second case involves a criminal mindset. Okello Katri, who robbed a credit union while carrying a smartphone that had a location history feature enabled with Google. Police caught him by using a geofence warrant to get 2 hours of data on devices in the vicinity of the crime. The robber argued this violated the Fourth Amendment's protection from unreasonable searches and seizures. The 6-3 outcome is that when police asked Google for the data, it was a search under the Fourth Amendment. An individual has a reasonable expectation of privacy in records about his cell phone's location, Justice Elena Kagan writes in Chartry versus U.S. We leave to the Court of Appeals the further question whether, given the warrant issued, the search here was reasonable. Lawyers rejoice. More litigation. Justice Alito, joined in part by Justices Barrett and Clarence Thomas, says this decision destabilizes Fourth Amendment law by announcing a new rule. The police must obtain a warrant every time they access any cell phone location information from a third party, however brief the duration, however innocuous the request, and however voluntarily that information was disclosed by the user. How much will this hamper future criminal investigations of robberies, assaults, and other serious crimes? What other digital paper trails might 5 justices similarly see as demanding an expectation of privacy? Good questions, and not what anyone would have to ask if this really were a lockstep conservative majority. From the opinion pages: The Russian Reckoning, the Ukraine War, Less Oil Revenue, and Restive Ex-Soviet Republics All Shrink Moscow's Sway, by Walter Russell Mead. Could Russia be losing its hard-won post-Cold War status as a great power? As the bad news for Vladimir Putin piles up, the question of Russian decline and its implications for world geopolitics is coming into focus. Recent weeks have been nightmarish for the Russian leader. Kyiv's drone strike deep into Russian territory have disrupted the lives of millions of Russians who have been told they were winning a war against a weak and ineffectual Ukraine. The unrelenting pace of military casualties continues to bleed Russia's declining population without significant battlefield advances. As blackouts and fuel shortages hobble Russian-occupied Crimea, where desperate tourists and residents are struggling to escape the hard-hit peninsula via war-damaged routes, Mr. Putin faces his greatest political challenge since Boris Yeltsin handed him the keys to the Kremlin in 1999. The news on the battlefront and in the air war is bad enough for the Kremlin. The big picture looks even worse. From a military point of view, the most salient aspect is the failure of Russian power in and around the Black Sea. In 2022, Russia's armed forces failed to capture the economically and strategically vital port of Odessa. Things have deteriorated ever since. Ukraine lacks a powerful navy, but missile strikes as well as drone attacks by air and sea have forced Russia's Black Sea fleet out of Sevastopol in occupied Crimea and neutralized Russian sea power. Russia has largely dominated the Black Sea since the 18th century reign of Catherine the Great. Securing that dominance lies at the heart of the imperial vision that drives Mr. Putin and his nationalist supporters. But Russian power in and around this vital waterway is significantly weaker than it was in 2022, and the outlook for gains is currently bleak. The longer the war goes on, the more Russian power in other former Soviet republics diminishes. The situation in the Caucasus and Central Asia is moving against Russia. The U.S., China, and Turkey are all developing economic and even military links that threaten Russia's hopes for control in territories first conquered by the Tsars. At the same time, the shifting balance of power is making itself felt in Belarus, where President Alexander Lukashenko is worried enough about Ukraine's threats that he is resisting pressure from Mr. Putin to use his territory to assist Russia's war. Finally, Russia's energy problems go well beyond the fuel shortages caused by recent Ukrainian drone attacks. The Middle East crisis, which only recently seemed to be throwing Mr. Putin a lifeline by spiking energy prices, has eased. If Iran and the U.S. reach agreements that allow substantial amounts of Iranian oil back onto world markets, Mr. Putin will face collapsing oil revenue. Ukrainian attacks on refineries and other facilities are curtailing Russia's ability to export. Put falling prices together with reduced output, and Russia faces some grim downshifts in government revenue, even as the war demands every ruble Mr. Putin can find. In the longer term, the likelihood of increased production in places like Venezuela and Argentina, even as China cuts back on imports, suggests lower prices. Progress toward a route for Central Asian oil and gas that avoids Russian territory further lessens Russia's power over world energy markets. It is too early to write off Mr. Putin or the country he leads. Russian scientists may find effective counters to Ukraine's current technological advances. And while the Russian ruler has never been much of a military strategist, he has pulled off more than one unlikely diplomatic win. And he continues to seek ways in which Russian assets, like its nuclear arsenal and its capabilities in cyber, hybrid, and information war, could tilt the balance back in Moscow's favor. But the laws of historical gravity ultimately make themselves felt. Russia's declining population, the failure of its tech industry to reach world-class levels, its broader economic failures since the end of the Cold War, the rise of China to the east, and the continuing force of nationalism in the ex-Soviet republics from Kyrgyzstan to Ukraine all weaken Russia's position in the world. Russia won't disappear, but Moscow's descent into the ranks of middle powers looks ever more likely. A world in which Russia no longer has much ability to threaten its neighbors would be a different place. The momentum for European rearmament would likely disappear. A China tempted by Russian weakness might seek the return of territories lost to the Tsars, even as it looked to draw the Central Asian republics further into its embrace. Freed from its worries about Russian power, Turkey would look to expand its economic and political power in the Balkans and the Middle East. Mr. Putin hoped to revive Russia as a superpower. His successors, it seems increasingly likely, may have to content themselves with less ambitious goals. You are listening to a reading of articles from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. America is the land of endless choice, except in politics. There's a case to be made for a two-party system, but what do you do when your party loses its mind? By Gerard Baker. Like most immigrants, I was astonished when I first came to America by the range of choices. Even the fanciest European supermarkets typically offered three types of milk: whole, semi skimmed, and skimmed. In America, the refrigerator door opens into a world of gorgeous diversity. I can have my milk whole, or with 1% or 2% fat. There's almond milk, soy milk, and something called half and half, midway between milk and cream. In Europe, even today, your choices in almost everything are much more constrained. This is a cultural feature, not a bug. I recently asked a waitress at a Paris restaurant for a medium rare steak. She explained that the kitchen prepared its steaks only rare or medium. I asked politely if the cook could leave the steak on the grill for somewhere between the time it took to make it rare and the time it took to make it medium. She looked at me as though I had asked her to bring me the cow so I could introduce myself. When it comes to politics, it's the other way around. In Europe, you will get short shrift if you ask the barista for non-fat, no foam, vanilla-flavored double-shot latte. But if you want a similarly tailor-made representative in government, the choice is yours. You can have your politics served communist, nationalist, social democratic, Christian democratic, green, socialist, conservative, liberal, and anything in between. In Britain, which, as in most things, used to look a bit like America, but now seems dysfunctional and weird, there's a six-way contest: Labor, Conservative, Reform, Green, Liberal, Democrat, plus Nationalist in Scotland and Wales. That isn't including those who think it's time Count Binface or Howling Lord Hope was given his chance. In America, political choice is binary, R or D. There's no soy doppio macchiato on the ballot. You have it black or white. Next customer? There is virtue in this. To some extent, the idea of diversity in governing choice is an illusion. Ultimately, all choices are binary. On the one hand, the choice we make. On the other, all the choices we reject. You win or lose. You're in government or in opposition. In Europe, they have to accommodate all those parties by forming coalitions after elections, which typically result in instability and the paradox that almost no one gets the government he actually voted for. In America, the coalitions exist within parties. They shift with changing national priorities and political trends. Thanks to the genius of a constitution that distributes power widely, the risk of tyrannous majority rule is limited. The primary system offers a wider choice. Parties can present different flavors of left and right to a primary electorate that winnows them down for the general. But this system is fraying. For one thing, we are becoming more like a parliamentary system in which the parties in the executive and legislative branches fuse into one, thus weakening constitutional restraints on party rule. For another, the primary system is becoming less of a vehicle that channels a wide range of choices into a narrower selection and more one that amplifies division. The victory by Democratic Socialists and their allies in the New York Democratic primaries last week is a signal moment in the nation's descent into political dystopia. In it, we see a Democratic base, relatively small in number, but energized by anti Trump rage, that has decided that the Black Lives Matter, no such thing as a woman, mostly peaceful rioting that the party nourished under Joe Biden and Kamala Harris is too timid for their taste. Sure, we can overstate its importance. New York isn't America. What passes for cool radicalism in Brooklyn's Park Slope would get a psychiatric evaluation in most of the country. But the nature of our politics means the direction the far left of the party is taking has outsized significance. In a narrowly divided House, even a handful of squad-like members will have the ability to drive outcomes by putting pressure on their party leadership. Few things could induce me to vote for another 4 years of the sort of republicanism we are enduring now. But one of them is definitely the alternative of Islamist-friendly, open the borders, defund the police, kill the billionaires socialist running the country. Out of America's vast diversity, we are somehow at risk of narrowing our choice to that between a rampantly corrupt, inept, ideologically impractical, capricious personality cult of a party and a party of graduate student activists with terrorist sympathies and ideas about economics that were discredited half a century ago. There's no prospect of a third-party breakthrough, but if I can live in a country where I can have my steak done medium rare and washed down with a glass of a liquid that is 1/3 soy, 1/3 oat, and 1/3 half and half, why can't I choose a government that is sane, honest, patriotic, responsible, and worthy of the people it governs? How immigrants from France built a great American company. This country, its culture, laws, and institutions brought out the best in generations of DuPonts by Ben DuPont. As the U.S. celebrates 250 years since the signing of the Declaration of Independence, I think that not only of my country, but also of my family. Not long after the American Revolution, on January 1st, 1800, Pierre Samuel DuPont de Nemours, his sons, and their families, 14 people in all, arrived in America. They fled the French Revolution, running for their lives, and found refuge in a republic still young and unfinished. They had no way of knowing whether their new country would survive, much less endure. They only knew it offered what the old world increasingly didn't: freedom to think, to work, and collaborate, to worship, and to build. The DuPonts made their start with gunpowder mills on the banks of the Brandywine River near Wilmington, Delaware. They supplied black gunpowder to the U.S. as its independence was tested in the War of 1812 and to the Union Army in the Civil War. In World War I, the company became a major source of smokeless powder and explosives for the Allies. During World War II, the DuPont Company turned its scientific and manufacturing capacity to national service, producing munitions, nylon parachutes, lucite airplane turrets, and many other products for the war effort. This included the Manhattan Project. In Hartford, Washington, DuPont designed, built, and operated the world's first full-scale plutonium production reactor. Company leaders were worried about safety, failure and accusations of profiteering. They accepted the job only after President FDR wrote to them with a personal appeal. The company's fee was $1 and profit was returned to the government. The atomic bomb remains a complicated topic, but the Manhattan Project revealed something extraordinary about America. Universities, governments, soldiers, scientists, and private companies came together under perilous circumstances to do what many had deemed impossible. DuPont owned a controlling stake in General Motors in those years. The automobile conglomerate converted from civilian manufacturing to wartime production, becoming part of America's arsenal of democracy. GM built trucks, tanks, guns, shells, ball bearings, aircraft, and ship engines for the war. DuPont and GM were different enterprises, but together they illustrate a central truth. Free enterprise, joined to national purpose, can become a decisive strategic advantage. On our 250th anniversary, I am thankful for the country that allowed my ancestors to build. They didn't create America's opportunity, they received it. They benefited from a political experiment made possible by the courage of the founders, the sacrifice of soldiers, the labor of ordinary citizens, and institutions strong enough to protect liberty. At the time of the Revolution, the U.S. drew ambitious people by offering them rights and legal protections, open markets, abundant land, and social mobility. Today, it draws entrepreneurs for many of the same reasons, updated for a modern age. Deep capital markets, world-class universities, sophisticated customers, a culture that tolerates failure, and a belief, sometimes battered but still alive, that a person's future need not be determined by birth. Immigrants are still answering the call, according to a recent analysis by the National Foundation for American Policy. Immigrants have founded or co-founded 59% of the 775 privately held startups in the U.S., valued at $1 billion or more. America remains the best place to turn an idea into a company. The entrepreneurial ecosystem works as well for customers. In the U.S., talent meets opportunity. Opportunity attracts capital. Capital builds products. Products meet customers. Customers invite competition, and competition drives progress. This progress reverberates globally. This is America exceptionalism properly understood. It isn't a claim that Americans are inherently better than anyone else. It's the recognition that America's institutions, habits, and freedoms have made ordinary people capable of extraordinary creation. But magnets can lose their strength if we punish risk, overregulate builders, sneer at industry, neglect education, or close the door to people who want to contribute. We will become less exceptional. To honor America at